Coming to you live via recording from Appleton, Wisconsin, it's time for your conservative smackdown. In this corner, your pugilistic pundit, the Duke of Diplomacy, the Professor of Patriotism, the Doctor of Domestic Tranquility.
This is Right Makes Might with Dr. Duke.
Hello, everybody, and welcome again to another episode of Right Makes Might, where we try to bring you a conservative spin on an incredibly out-of-control world. True to form, our subject today defies comprehension. We're going to go to the University of Ottawa in Canada. Now, you know, the Canadians, they've been leading in the liberal insanity in North America for about 50 years now. Although we're doing our best under the Obama administration to catch up with them, I still think it's going to take some time to get to this level of insanity. We have for you today the Yoga Menace. Student leaders have pulled the mat out from under 60 University of Ottawa students, ending a free on-campus yoga class over fears that the teachings could be seen as a form of, quote, cultural appropriation, unquote. Staff at the Center for Students with Disabilities believe that, quote, while yoga is really a great idea and accessible and great for students, there are cultural issues of implication involved in the practice, unquote. Now, this is really shocking when you stop and think about it. First thing that I'd like to ask is, what in the world are staff at the Center for Students with Disabilities concerned about yoga for? I could see the argument if what the Student Disability Center was arguing, that yoga is somehow an unfair practice because differently abled kids aren't able to participate the same way that traditionally abled kids are able to participate. But that's not what the students with disabilities are angry about. They're objecting to the fact that North American kids are somehow ripping off Asian culture, somehow exploiting culture by engaging in the endeavor of yoga. What I love about this is that you've got a situation on campus now where everything is cultural appropriation. You remember a few years ago at the Tostitos Fiesta Bowl during the bowl season, college football. Kids brought their bags of Tostitos, and after their team won, they were showering the field with Tostitos. Well, this, of course, was racist against Mexican culture, Hispanic culture. The irony, the idea that a Tostito, a little round chip corn flour, has anything to do with authentic Mexican cuisine is absurd. Nevertheless, it was a form of cultural appropriation. Everything. I want to ask, too, why is it not cultural appropriation when you got little white kids tooling down the road in their VW Beetles jamming out to rap music? Isn't that cultural appropriation? Should we require no white kids whatsoever be allowed to purchase or listen to rap music? This kind of stuff is absolutely insane. Moving forward, we find this quote about the Yoga Menace. Quote, yoga has been under a lot of controversy lately due to how it is being practiced. Hey, Spark, have you ever heard of the controversy over how we're practicing yoga? I mean, I can't find a single article scouring the internet of people being angry about how yoga is being performed or who's performing it. This is completely manufactured nonsense. Quote, yoga has been under a lot of controversy lately due to how it is being practiced, unquote, and which cultures those practices are being taken from. The center official argues that since many of those cultures, quote, have experienced oppression, cultural genocide, so we're killing cultures now, Mike. Did you know that? Genocide usually is the physical eradication of a people. But the idea that, listen, wait for it, the idea that practicing yoga in this country is not keeping it alive, it's not promoting it, it's not revivifying it, it's not honoring it. White kids practicing yoga in Canada is now an example of culturally destroying yoga. The twisted logic here is shocking. The idea that these cultures, Asian cultures, places like India, have experienced oppression, cultural genocide, and diasporas due to colonialism and Western supremacy. We need to be mindful of this and how we express ourselves while practicing yoga. So I suppose depends on what you wear, right? There's going to have to be a whole new line of culturally neutral yoga outfits. Maybe we replace these synthetic mats with really rush bamboo mats. 1,000 things you can do to make this better. So what we decided to do here at Right Make Might is we decided to put together our own list of culturally sensitive yoga positions. I figured perhaps the best way to go about this is to try to create a liberal-friendly kind of yoga, a yoga that is not just about mind, body, and soul, because we progressives don't believe in souls, but a yoga that's going to just really be acceptable to the politics of the modern university. We start here with what I like to call the pretzel twist logic pose. It's the kind of pose you get into, it's the kind of way you contort your body, the intellectual contortions, that make you think that one and the same time, honoring cultures by naming things after them and abusing them by naming things after them is one and the same thing. From this twisted logic, aren't we going to have to rename almost every state in the country on the premise that states like Ohio or Mississippi all have Indian names? And those states that don't, like Washington, are honoring, a great racist slaveholder, George Washington. So in the twisted logic pretzel pose, naming states after, white people, in honor of white culture, that of course is racist. Naming states Indian names is, of course, a form of cultural appropriation. To say nothing of all the rivers and the lakes and the ponds we're going to have to rename, the streets, the alleyways, the little cul-de-sacs that all have wonderful Indian names. We're going to get rid of all of those. All right? That's the pretzel twist logic pose. We move on to what I call the Teeter Totter shifting principles pose. We have here, and notice, I want to make it abundantly clear that we use shadow figures. We want to suggest no race, right? And any resemblance between shadows and people of darker skin is purely coincidental. It is not a statement of endorsement nor a statement of condemnation. The ponytail, right, might imply male or female. It's a perfectly transgendered image. I know many midlife crisis white males who sport the ponytail as a way of trying to preserve their lost youth, so consider it a very gender indeterminate image. But notice what you've got here. You've got the teeter-totter, right? Teeter-totter. There she is propped up on one leg, equally balanced between the front and the rear. Depending upon which side of the cultural issue has the most victim status, she can immediately pivot one way or the other, right, like a teeter-totter, to be perfectly aligned, well, not with yoga practice, but certainly with political correct pieties. And from there we move to the head up the rectum denial pose. Seems to me that the whole purpose of all of this progressive censorship is to stick your head as far up your as you possibly can. Right? And why would you do that? Because to demonstrate the supine nature of your spine and the turtle ducking its head back into a shell, the ostrich burying its head in the sand, this image here of complete and absolute disconnect from the realities of ordinary life. And then, of course, we've got what I call the preemptive surrender pose. It's a perfect yoga position for liberals, right? If we're going to take this into a Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom metaphor, this also could be called as the presenting position, a perfect image of the squishy liberal who bends over and takes it from any grievance group across the world. And then we move to one of my favorites, the bend over backwards appeasement pose, right? Anybody who threatens you, anybody who demands something from you, anybody who argues that you have at any point in your history said something to offend them, immediately assume this position. And keep your mouth closed. You don't want to show any teeth. Keep your mouth closed, bend over, right? Make a completely submissive gesture like this. And notice the individual in our little pose there forms the shape of a D for duh, right? This bend over backwards appeasement pose is really remarkable when dealing with jihadis and violent refugees. We urge it. And maybe if we started to do this, maybe if we turned yoga, and let's face it, everything, into a form of liberal zeitgeist, a form of liberal concession to the powers that be, a way of surrendering preemptively to everything, anyone, anywhere, anytime, maybe then we would be allowed to continue to practice yoga on campuses like the University of Ottawa, although I'm not so sure. Well, we'll see you next time on Right Makes Might.
Don't miss a second of Dr. Duke. Visit FreedomProject.com and sign up for our free newsletter. Like us on Facebook or follow us in the Twitterverse. All the links can be found at FreedomProject.com.